Austrian hills have been replaced by the British countryside, but there's a lot of things staying the same, with this week starting already with Max Verstappen to Mercedes. GPBlog and Tim Kraaij are in the paddock, and we're going to talk through everything on Paddock Update. And Tim, it's a similar story. I don't know how many times we've spoken about it this season. Max going to Mercedes, is he, isn't he? What's happening so far? It seems it's really ramped up this past week since the Spielberg race.
Yeah, I think we can go back even longer, because it's been a story already from even last year when Toto Wolff openly let know that he wanted to have Max Verstappen in his car already for this season. So yeah, it's still the same situation with a lot of the key players talking about it, but there's no movement whatsoever. From sources we know that Max Verstappen would like to stay with Red Bull Racing, but there's have to be some changes, some internal changes within the team, especially in terms of the leadership. That's what we hear. But there are multiple stories going around in terms of an exit clause, in terms of payment, if he leaves the team or anything like that. Sky Italia even reported that he was already signed by Mercedes. That is really not the case. That's confirmed by all parties in here. But yeah, it's still the story people talk about here.
Right, let's get into this properly. What has Max said about the situation? Has he said that this is happening? He must be aware of all the discussions.
I think, first of all, the funny thing was right behind me in the Red Bull hospitality. We started off with 2 small tables on the ground floor, but it got so busy that they moved back to upstairs. Only the problem was that all the media had to move from ground floor to upstairs. So it was quite a mayhem in there. And then when we got upstairs, I got a little bit lucky sitting next to Max Verstappen so that I could follow the whole conversation and could ask him some questions. But it was 3 rows thick around him. His side of the story, though, was quite simple and the same as last week. Even better, he didn't even want to add anything to all the things he'd said in Austria. He didn't want to add anything alongside it on the supposed lead deal, on the supposed talks with Mercedes, on the supposed contract. He still reiterates that he has a contract with Red Bull Racing up until 2028. He reiterated that he doesn't go with a sabbatical, so it's not an option of leaving the sport at some point before his contract runs out. But he don't want to add anything further. He also doesn't say, I'm certainly in that car next year. And that keeps the door open in terms of the conversation. And that's in line with, like I said, what we hear behind scenes is, yeah, he would like to stay within the team, but there are doubts about Red Bull leadership and the way forward.
So much to find out. We're not going to find out this weekend, it doesn't sound like. But what's the situation at the Mercedes side of this? We've got so much from Red Bull. We've had Max Verstappen not add anything, but George Russell seems to be the man kind of stuck in the middle of all this. What's his take?
Yeah, I think he dropped a bomb last week, of course, in the weekend that there were talks between Mercedes and Max Verstappen. This week he was flattening it down a little bit more. He said during the press conference that he's quite sure about his future with Mercedes. He's not having talks with other teams. That's what he says. Of course, there are rumors going around that he is in talks with other teams. And that he is quite certain that he will drive for Mercedes next year. But how long do you sign them for? That's the question, of course. And also for George Russell, what does he want to sign? Is it a 1+1 deal again, or does he want a longer contract with Mercedes? Because, yeah, if he signs a 1-year deal and Max jumps in that car in 2027, all the good work for him is done. So I think those are the conversations at the moment. But he said that the chances of him not driving for Mercedes next year are very, very small.
What's the situation should Max leave? We don't know where George will go, in Aston Martin rumours. But, of course, all eyes on Isaac Hadjar as a standout driver from this season. What's his take on all this? Because it looks like it could be a cursed seat if he did actually go and join the Red Bull camp.
He still thinks that Red Bull is the biggest team to go to, and that is still his dream to end up there eventually. Only at the moment, it doesn't feel like, yeah, you want to move teams. He doesn't feel ready yet at the moment as well. That is something that he said. He thinks he still needs to learn, needs to make mistakes at Racing Bulls before he makes the next step to Red Bull Racing. And I think that's only fair. Talk about that in the paddock is now that he is the replacement of Yuki Tsunoda next year next to Max Verstappen. The replacement of Max Verstappen, I don't think so. I think they should go looking somewhere else. But oh, good Lord. Different scenery for some reason. I don't know why. Maybe you can see it in the bloopers. But yeah, he doesn't feel ready yet at the moment to make that step. But he still has the dream to end up at Red Bull Racing. I think that makes sense. I asked Isaac as well about Max Verstappen because at the start of the season, he mentioned that he's analyzing Max Verstappen every race, every qualifying, not because he's his rival, but more because he likes how Max drives and he wants to learn from it because he thinks he's the best. And he was talking about, the thing Max does is that he never makes errors, and that he's always there and always delivering, especially in Q3 and in the race.
I think that kind of driver who wouldn't let his phone tripod fall on the ground, I'd say, Tim. That's a sort of no errors Max Verstappen, right? Let's talk about the last driver to cause such a seismic shake-up in the driver market, Lewis Hamilton. He obviously moved out of Mercedes to Ferrari. Is this something that he can see similar with what's going on with Red Bull and Mercedes right now?
Yeah, he got asked in his press moment today, and I found it to be a quite interesting answer he gave. He was quite complimentary, even flirting to some extent with Red Bull Racing about the fact that he thinks it's a very interesting and good team. In the past, he'd said something about Red Bull Racing only being a fizzy drinks company that also happened to build cars. And he said he regretted that remark, and that he thinks Red Bull is a very good team, and that he thinks that it's good for Max Verstappen to be there, and it's a team that has dominated F1 for certain years. But he was also, of course, quite complimentary about Mercedes and about a possible move from Max Verstappen to Mercedes. He was quite open that Mercedes would be a good team to make a move for. There wasn't really a question about what he thought about Rosso. I would be quite interesting how he feel about that. But that's something maybe we can come up later in this week.
And the other driver who is the master manipulator of the driver market, Fernando Alonso. I know you've had the chance to hear what he's had to say about this whole situation with Max and Mercedes as well.
Yeah, I tried. First of all, I asked him if he had advice for Max Verstappen. It was the last question in his press moment with Fernando. And first of all, I thought he was going to completely blank me because he said, no, don't want to comment. But then he turned back because I asked for his advice, and then he made a joke and he said, but if he wants advice, I can consult him, but he's gonna need to pay a lot of money. So he was on his funny chair again, Fernando. But yeah, I didn't want to go into detail if Max should move to Mercedes or anything like that.
When he's on form, he really is on form. And the final thing, the fellow Spaniard in the paddock, Carlos Sainz, he seems to be maybe the template for what George Russell could become should this whole Max to Mercedes thing work out. What's Sainz's take on this situation?
Yeah, it was quite interesting to know how Sainz would feel about this, because he thought he had spoken about a Red Bull move last year as well, but Red Bull didn't want him in the team back then. If a seat would open, would he be open to rejoining or at least joining Red Bull for next season? But he shut that door right down. He said, no, my future is with Williams. I have a 2-year contract. I want to sit out this team. I have a lot of belief in the team, in James Vowles and everything going on, in the steps they're making. Carlos Sainz won't be the possible if replacement of Max Verstappen if he leaves.
So I said last week, speaking to Ludo, this looked to me as if it was, I don't know, negotiation tactic, something to keep Mercedes in the front of people's minds when they're slipping down the order a little bit. But the way it's erupted this last week, what's your take on this whole situation? What is going on?
I think it's two things. First of all, it's Toto Wolff and Mercedes wanted to keep the door open as long as possible to get the best driver. That is Max Verstappen. There's no doubt about it. He tried it in 2024. He tries it this year as well. And he wants to keep that door open as long as he can possibly do. In everything, Max is a step up. And of course, a team like Mercedes does everything to get such a big name back. And especially, like if you look back at Mercedes in F1, they started out with Michael Schumacher as the big name. They followed him up with Lewis Hamilton. And ever since Lewis left, they have a gap in that sense in terms of marketing-wise, but also in steering a team. I think looking from the Max Verstappen camp, they want to try and drag this on a little bit longer, of course. They want to see if Red Bull can improve, if there maybe are some changes behind scenes from management perspective where they get a little bit more what they want, and especially more rest within the team. It's been quite chaotic ever since the start of last season, of course, and it never seemed to be quieting down ever since. And I think that's the main struggle of the Max Verstappen camp.
It sounds to me, to really stretch this metaphor out, that it's like a fire and two arsonists just continuing to put more fuel on it. It's just really turning into an inferno at the moment. Tim, you're in the best possible place to find out how this evolves. You've got the team principals to talk as well, and we'll obviously have access to the drivers over the weekend. Thank you for everything you brought to us so far in this Max Verstappen to Mercedes special Paddock Update episode. And thank you everybody else for watching.